Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always is Janie Gillette. And we're back here for another episode of the podcast, and we're going to discuss a major hire by the Nebraska coaching staff, adding a general manager, and a great move by Matt Rule. So we'll get in depth about that. We've also got some recruiting news heating up in 2026 with a bunch of visits, and we'll check in on some bracketology updates and discuss what the Nebraska basketball teams need to do to advance to the NCAA tournament here with March Madness quickly approaching. So before we get into all that, please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get into the comment section. And Danny, how are you doing on this Thursday morning?
I'm doing well. I'm actually wide awake. I think our late start here woke me up a little bit and it gave me a chance to wake up. So let's do that again. That sounds good to me.
Well, and it was, I guess, coming into this week, we were wondering how much news we would have on Thursday and different things to talk about, but actually quite a few things to talk about. And we'll start with a new hire by Nebraska, which was announced Wednesday night. Pete Thamel of ESPN reported it. It was confirmed by, a bunch of other Nebraska reporters. But Pat Stewart, a guy coming from the NFL, worked for the Eagles. He's worked for the Patriots, worked for the Panthers, worked in pro personnel for the New England Patriots, is coming over now to be the general manager for Matt Rule. And, if you look at the landscape of college football, lots of other teams have general managers. North Carolina is paying Michael Lombardi $1.5 million to be their general manager. Oklahoma just hired the guy who's been running the Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, to be their general manager. So
which I think is a really solid one because he's really smart. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and just so if Nebraska fans don't like this move or don't understand why it's essential, like if you want to keep up with the Joneses, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
And to get a guy has a scouting background and a pro personnel background, with the transfer portal and NIL, I think it's overdue. It's long overdue, and I think this is one of the best moves that Matt Rule has made as Nebraska football head coach.
8 out of the 12 teams that were in the college football playoff this past season have a general manager. So this isn't something that Nebraska has as a specialty or that they're wasting money on or this, that, and the other thing. Whatever I've heard from the fans, I mean, this is a hire that should be made, a hire that probably honestly should have been made a couple of years ago. But now we're really seeing the financial aspect of college football, the money management aspect of college football, and paying players. Those are three big elements of the college football landscape now. And so a general manager is a very smart move, and bringing in a guy like Pat Stewart, who had experience during the better years of the Patriots, I might add, not the current iteration, but the better years, is a smart move.
Yeah, and it's just, when you look at the way that you're building, rosters in college football, it's a lot different than it used to be. And Matt Rule talked about this in a podcast with Urban Meyer, where he was talking about, some of the SEC scheduling and yada, yada. But he was talking also about, high school recruiting and how it's much different than it used to be. He still said that he wants 65 to 75% of the roster to be, high school recruits. But he also said that, we're looking at more like 15 high school recruits a year instead of like 20 or 25 as it used to be. So, I mean, you might be looking at, maybe 15 high school recruits, maybe 10, 12 transfers. And that's just the additions that you make to your team every year. So having a guy who's worked in pro personnel, who's scouting, because what do you need to do in the transfer? I mean, Matt Rule talked about, like every day he was coming into his office and, checking out PFF and looking at film and trying to find players, who fit Nebraska. Well, that's what you need a general manager to do. And so this guy, and what Nebraska needs to be doing is throughout the season, they need to be studying players and looking at potential guys who should be, going into the transfer portal, and how they should be tampering with these players. If they see guys in October, November that they can identify, tamper with them because everybody else is doing it. So, you know what? You need to say hell with the rules. And until somebody actually defines that and starts punishing people for tampering, you just have to do it. Like, you absolutely have to do it. I think Pete Nakos even had a piece out for on3.com where a staffer basically was like, if you're not tampering, then your program is behind. So you need to identify players that can help your team, whether that's group of 5, whether that's, other teams in the Power 4, and start reaching out to them, start putting out feelers. And then get to the portal and be prepared and have a plan, because that's what the other teams are doing. A lot of these teams, when players get to the portal, like, they've already had contact with them, they've already identified them. And so this will give you a guy who has a chance to scout players in other teams, because when they're talking about giving, I mean, we gave Rocco Spindler, I don't know exactly how much money, but probably 6 figures, right? Like, we need to be scouting and hitting on these players, because there's not an endless amount of money, right? I mean, like, I know it seems like you can spend, yada, 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 but these players still have to produce at some point. And so I think it's very important that you make sure you spend your money on the right guys and at the right positions. And having an NFL mind, I think, will help just make all of that work better for Nebraska in terms of managing their roster.
Well, it's a good point you made about having an NFL mind, because you look at a lot of this coaching staff and they've played or been coaches in the NFL. John Butler, Terry Braden. I'm sure I'm missing a couple guys there, but those are the two ones that stick out in my mind. And I think it's also important to note that the associate head coach, Phil Snow, for as old as he is, he's been, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but as part of the older generation, he is still very receptive to the transfer portal and receptive to kind of this new era of college football. So it's nice to see that cohesiveness, especially with a guy like Snow, who has been part of the older generations of college football, and that he's willing to adapt.
And yeah, I was looking at Nebraska's, coaching, or basically like their staff, and they do have a general manager right now. Unfortunately, he's not going to have a job anymore. I'm sure they'll give him a different job. Let's see, Sean Padden is actually the current general manager, and he worked with Rule. He was the vice president of football operations with the Panthers. He was the associate athletic director for football operations at Baylor. So, I mean, definitely has a lot of experience in football, but more of a college football mind. And I just think that with the way that rosters are working now, it really is an NFL mindset. I know people maybe don't like that, but that's just the reality. I mean, you're building a team, you're looking at positions of value. We saw that in the transfer portal: offensive tackle, quarterback, wide receiver, defensive line. There's certain positions where you have to identify and pony up money for players, because there's a very finite group of guys available. So I think just adding all of these different positions and adding a general manager with scouting and NFL, personnel experience, which I think is really going to help in the transfer portal, and also helping with even just scouting, because if you're only taking 15 high school recruits a year, I mean, you need to get the right ones, because your scholarships, especially now, Nebraska used to just be like, well, whatever, we'll have walk-ons, and scholarship limits and things weren't really that big of an issue, but now it is. Now we do have these limits, and you're going to be turning away. Nebraska's going to be turning away players that want to play here. So you need to make sure that you're getting the right ones, and getting another guy with that much personnel experience in the NFL, I think, is only going to help.
And Sean Payton will be the assistant athletic director for strategic initiatives, and what that entails is, helping with the salary cap, contract negotiations, and analytics. So he'll still have a position within the program, but it just won't be his current one.
Yeah, it's actually crazy if you look down the entire list of guys that are I think Ed Foley's kid is on the staff. Looks like Charlie Foley as an assistant director.
Is Ed Foley himself on the staff still? In some sort of role,
I mean, they still have him as special teams coordinator, so they haven't updated this yet, but yeah, it's interesting, all the staff positions, but I'll tell you, I think this is a major major move, and Michigan's hired one, and Sean McGee is their general manager, and that he made a critical impact in trying to land Bryce Underwood and some of the guys that Michigan was able to get. So I feel like it just kind of sets the tone when you're with recruits and saying, hey, this is what we value, this is how much we're going to pay you, etc. And just having somebody else that can, it strikes me, I guess, with some of these guys that went to the NFL from college, like Jeff Hafley's just a name that comes to mind, being like, I don't want to be a general manager type thing. I don't want to do all this type of stuff. Well, this takes a lot of that off of Matt Rule's plate, I feel like. He's obviously going to have a big impact on what the roster is, but he doesn't have to sit here and worry about all these contracts as much and worry about retaining guys. I mean, he still does, but he can delegate that authority a little bit to a guy who has that experience of an NFL, front office. And I think, because I mean, another thing is you're seeing a lot of players too, and Matt's talked about this. Plenty of coaches have talked about this, but they're coming back and renegotiating. They're being like, oh, I played well, I want to come back and get more money, and that's a conversation that you need to be able to learn how to navigate. And having somebody who has been in NFL front offices is going to help more, because it's like, hey man, this is what you did, this is what your positional value is, this is what we can pay you fairly, and you have to be able to have those conversations with people. And so I feel like retention and player retention and all that stuff really factors into this too.
And I think, it's really interesting how, just 2 years ago, Nebraska established the position of NIL director, right? And now, 2 years later, they now have a general manager. The NIL is much better. And so, how far they've come under Matt Rule and Troy Dannon, too, as far as NIL is concerned in the past 2 seasons, is definitely admirable and notable and necessary.
Yeah, and I think I'm hoping that there'll be even more, NIL support for basketball too, with Troy Dannon in the 1890, because that's going to be, trying to build a team through high school recruiting in basketball is going to be even more challenging than it was before. So
That was
it's
never
going to
Fred's
be,
bag anyway, either. Let's be honest here.
yeah, well, it's just
Yeah,
tough, it's tough
yeah.
where they're at. So anyway, and speaking of recruiting, a good segue to some Nebraska football recruiting is heating up in the 2026 class. And we talked about this recently, but I was not long ago sitting there being like, man, why does Nebraska not have more June official visits set up? Well, they did start
I
to get
heard you.
plenty. Yeah, they heard me. They got plenty this week. So just kind of going through some of them. This might not be all of them, but like Luke Sorensen, tight end from California, is visiting. Ryan Mosley, we mentioned him earlier. Camden Jensen, the 6'7", 220-pound tight end from Colorado, will be taking an official visit. Lincoln Watkins, another tight end from Michigan. Danny Odom, a cornerback from Florida, who I really like. I think he is a little bit underrated. And Jabari Brady, a big-time receiver from Florida.
I like him too.
CJ Brona, who is committed to Nebraska, who just has really got a big update in the rankings, which was good to see. He's coming back for an official visit, which I think is important because, man, like some SEC teams are going to try to flip this kid. When he committed, he was unranked, but if you looked into his stats, he had like 6 interceptions last season. And he runs the 100-meter in 10.3. So it didn't take a genius to look at his film and be like, this dude needs to be a 4-star. He on 3 moved him up to number 139 in the country, which boosted his composite ranking up to like 314th or 317th. So like this guy, I think CJ Brona is one of the best corners in the 2026 class. Like I really believe that. I think he's a top 10 cornerback. And because he's got size too. He's 6'1", runs 10.3, and has ball skills. Like you cannot, like that's exactly what you want from a corner. Like this is a prototypical corner. And Charles Power, the scouting director of On3, like really talked him up recently in their update. So Nebraska, talking about evaluating players, like when he committed, he was unranked. So that's just another example of them over the past 2 years identifying players that nobody else kind of saw coming. And that, that speaks with like Rex Waterman. I know people, were like, oh, Rex Waterman's not ranked. This guy sucks. And it's like, yeah, CJ Brona wasn't ranked either. So you can't just always trust the rankings. Nebraska has a good eye for talent, and Rex Waterman, big tackle, is going to be coming in for a visit. Luke Waffle, an edge, a top 100 player, is going to be. He just scheduled an official visit too. So things really trending up, I think, in the 2026 class, and a busy month of June setting up for Nebraska.
Jabari Brady and Ryan Mosley are 2 guys that are really interesting to me. I love the way they play. They're both big-time playmakers, Southern wide receivers, which is interesting to me because it seems like when you look at Ryan Mosley, Jabari Brady, they are still trying to recruit in the South. And then you have the tight ends, Lincoln Watkins, Luke Sorensen, those guys. They really want a tight end in this class, it seems. And they are, Camden Jensen you mentioned too as well. So they're doing their homework on the tight end position. I honestly feel really good about Danny Odom because he talked about his relationship with Addison Williams and Coach Rule and how he really liked Coach Rule. So I'm not going to say he's a guaranteed commit, but I really like where Nebraska stands with him. It seems like they're making a strong impression. And it's just really interesting to see how Nebraska continues to recruit the southern part of the country. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I don't think they're straying away from the state of Texas by any means, but I do think there's more of a focus on Georgia and Florida. And, that I think is largely in part to Phil Simpson. Phil Simpson and a guy like Jamar Mosey, who also has ties in Florida as well as the Midwest. So I think some of these staff members that were hired as analysts, as coaches, I think we're starting to see their influence pay off, especially when it comes to Southern recruiting.
Yeah, and it's I think they've just they focused really on that 500-mile radius, St. Louis and Kansas and some of those other places Matt Rule talked about wanting to get into Chicago. But yeah, there's those other, Texas, California, you mentioned Georgia, just anywhere that you can kind of recruit nationally as much as you can. So, I mean, speaking of California players, Brian Bonner, a top 100 running back at Nebraska in his top 8 this week. So he's a guy I think they need to get back for. I think this is a recruitment that they can win. UCLA is one of the teams in the mix. Michigan is, but they have a lot of running back irons in the fire. Stanford, Washington, Georgia in the mix. But I feel like Nebraska, has a chance. He visited twice. Already. Visited this for Junior Day. So he's another name I'm kind of watching to get back for an official visit. There was another running back actually that I saw that is coming for an official visit in the 2026 class. I can't remember. Jamal Rule is his name, actually, not RHUL, but RULE, Jamal Rule, which kind of I thought is interesting out of Charlotte. Christian, unranked in the 2026 class, but does have offers from NC State, Arkansas, Wisconsin, Boston College, Syracuse, Virginia Tech. So quite a few ACC and SEC offers. 6 foot, 205 pounds. So he's another running back to kind of monitor there. They've got a couple for official visits, but he's the most recent. And we'll see if Brian Bronner sets up an official visit with Nebraska.
So it's going to be a tough one. He's really, really good. He is a all-purpose back, receiving back, as well as running back. So that's going to be a really tough recruitment, but I'll be interested to see where Nebraska falls there.
And with C.J. Brown in the rankings update, I think that was one interesting thing seeing him. Another is that Jeff Tamala, the Millard South quarterback, is now the number 1 ranked player in the state for the 2026 class. He's now number, I think, 255 in the 24/7 composite rankings.
Is he? I haven't heard enough Nebraska fans complain about how we haven't offered him yet. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess that is my question. Do you think Nebraska should offer this kid because they haven't offered him? He's ranked 19. I mean, I know that rankings aren't everything, but there's a huge difference between him and Dayton Raiola, who's ranked like 788th or something. He is 19th among quarterbacks right now. And let's see where Dayton Raiola stands in there. So Dayton's 904 overall, and he's 74th among quarterbacks. So, and he doesn't. And the other thing with Dayton Raiola too is you look at his offer sheet. The only teams that have offered him outside of Nebraska are Charlotte and Appalachian State. So, is Nebraska missing the boat on the quarterback? Recruiting in 2026. Like, did they make a mistake in putting all their eggs in Dayton Raiola's basket?
It's a tough question, but they put all their eggs initially in the Daniel Kalen basket, and look where Daniel Kalen is now. I think there's something to be said about the competition in Nebraska versus competition in Georgia. That doesn't mean I don't think they should offer them, but just because they're highly ranked in Nebraska doesn't mean that – not that they're not good, but that the competition, I think, is a little bit tougher in Georgia. And, when you look at Daniel Kalen now, he's not even with the program anymore. And initially, we both agreed that he was a can't-miss prospect. But now, I mean, it's like sometimes the highest-rated prospects in Nebraska don't correlate to, success on a national level. As I think the competition's a little bit stronger in Georgia. So I don't know. I mean, they should offer him, but I'm not going to lose sleep if they miss the boat on him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I still think Kalen can be a good quarterback. I mean, it would be different if, it's just hard to know how that would have worked out if Dylan Raiola,
I still think he can be a good quarterback too. I mean, I don't want to bash him at all, but he's not even on the roster anymore. So that to me, it just makes me wonder about the level of competition in Nebraska and how that correlates to skill on a national level, if that makes sense to me. And that's not just for the quarterback position; that's for all positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just, it just depends. But I do think it's interesting. I don't think that they're going to offer him. I think they have made their decision. They've made their evaluation. I mean, unless they're taking 2 quarterbacks. Yeah, for sure. But like you said, it's difficult because you always have to be. I think you always have to be recruiting that position because you just never know what's going to happen. Like TJ Lateef could spend 1 year at Nebraska and then make the same decision that Daniel Kalen did. I want to go somewhere where I can compete to be a starter as a sophomore, which isn't going to happen at Nebraska. Like, it's just not for him. Like, TJ Lateef has to sit for a guaranteed 2 years before he's ever going to sniff the field. So is he gonna wait for that long? Like, I hope so, but there's no guarantees anymore. So I think you have to recruit every single class like you're trying to find a new starter because you might need him to be your starter.
Let's be honest here. It's not like you can't go out and pay for another quarterback in the transfer portal now. I mean, it's easier to do now. So, as much as, sorry to kind of hijack your thing here, but as much as, we might have missed the boat, again, it's like the general manager thing. You either get what you can or get left behind. And in past years, Nebraska has been slow in recruiting quarterbacks. So while Tamalia, I think, is a good player and would have been nice, I'm comfortable with Raiola and the fact that we were able to get him early because who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, and it'll be it'll be interesting to see. I know some Nebraska fans are probably, like, hey, why haven't we got this kid? Really, it's interesting because if you look at the top 2 players in the 24/7 sports composite rankings for the state of Nebraska didn't recruit either of them. So the one is an offensive lineman who's committed to Illinois, and the other is Tamala, who, Missouri's, he's got like 12 offers in the last 2 weeks, and most of them have been from Power 4 programs, Iowa State, Missouri, like not major names, but starting to pick up. And now that there's not a ton of quarterbacks left in the 2026 class, he's going to be a pretty hot name, I would say, in the Midwest, especially. But Nebraska made their evaluation. They could change that, but here's the thing too: is there's the other aspect of, you've got Raiola and his brother's the starting quarterback. Like, are you gonna push, worry about his commitment when his brother's moving into his senior season? Probably not. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And maybe they could say, hey, we're going to take 2 quarterbacks, but I really think that recruiting one puts the other in jeopardy. And I think that they really have evaluated Dayton Raiola and are saying, like, hey, we think he's going to be more in 2 years than he's going to be right now. And so they've been right about a lot of those ones. I mean, Jeremiah Jones was way underrated. There was guys. I'm trying to think, that guy, was it Carlon Jones who Nebraska got, then went to Ohio State or Alabama? Yeah. So, there's a bunch of guys, CJ Brown. There's a bunch of guys where Nebraska has been ahead of the rankings, and sometimes, like, look, this might look bad, but it's. What are you going to do? You're going to be like, hey, Dayton, like, sorry, we 24/7 ranked him higher, so we're going to go with him now. Like, you have to trust your evaluation. It's not like they didn't know who that kid was. At the same time, he could have improved and gotten better, but they like Raiola, and I think that's going to stay that way. Not saying that that's the right move, but I think they've already made their decision in terms of 2026 quarterback, and I think that their focus is on trying to get Trey Taylor in 2027 right now. So
good. I'm so happy you mentioned that because he's another quarterback, but also, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but let's be honest, Dylan has a good season this year. I don't know, 10-2, 9-3, even maybe 8-4. Teams are going to come calling. So even now, it's not a guarantee that Dylan will stay on the roster necessarily for the right price. And so, the situations like these are always fluid. And I know a lot of it is up to the players' agents, and agents are putting bugs in players' ear. I'm not necessarily a fan of agents in college sports, but I just think it's about what you can get now and not necessarily waiting for talent anymore. And I think that kind of goes back to the transfer portal high school argument as well. I mean, you can't necessarily wait for somebody to develop, and now a player doesn't want to wait to be developed and play. So I think you kind of have to take the instant gratification these days over, a long process of development.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And it's going to be an interesting time, I think, moving forward. And I still
like
think
Trey Taylor, by the way. I'm glad you said something about Trey.
I like Trey Taylor a lot too. He's Nebraska's going to be taking another visit to Nebraska. He's expected to make a decision this summer, he said. So we'll see where that kind of lines up. I think the next visits are going to be really important. I think Michigan's right there. I think Nebraska's right there. I feel like those are the teams I've heard the most about. I know Notre Dame's right in the mix, a bunch of others, but it seems like, I don't know, I just feel like Michigan and Nebraska kind of have the inside track right now with Trey Taylor.
Yeah, he said he's liked the business school, and for him, it's far enough away from home, but close enough to where he can still kind of be home. So that's a part of it too. I'm really intrigued by that recruitment, and I think that's part of the reason why Tamalia hasn't been offered yet either, because I think the program believes they have a good shot with Trey Taylor, and I believe that as well. I don't know what you read on the Michigan part of it is, but I think Nebraska has a good shot with Taylor.
Yeah, I think he has a good shot too. They Michigan just hired Chip Lindsey to be their offensive coordinator, and he was recruiting Trey Taylor when he was at North Carolina. So, I mean, I think Michigan still has some ties there. But yeah, it's going to be a tough battle. But I think Nebraska's right, in the thick of it right now. So, in terms of the 2026 class, they're ranked pretty low right now, but they've only got 2 commitments, so nothing to really worry about. But things I think are starting to heat up. Jace Reynolds is also another guy who's going to be visiting. We mentioned him. With tight ends, it is notable that Matt Ludwig, really they are out of the mix with Matt Ludwig. It seems he has visits for Michigan, Texas Tech, Georgia, and I think is trying to set one up for Texas A&M. Nebraska's not even going to get a visit. So even though they technically have the crystal ball lead for Matt Ludwig, it doesn't seem like they're involved in that recruitment, which does disappoint me because I think he's a stud.
I mean, they got 3 other visits coming on deck, so I don't know. I mean, I really like Sorensen. I really like Watkins too, and Camden Jensen is a guy that I'm watching too. So it's not like, I think Nebraska will get one of those tight ends, obviously, and I think those are good players. But I think it's just a continued fluid situation. I mean, Ludwig committed in September, I believe it was, or
He hasn't committed. He's still
he
he
visited
visited.
in
Yeah,
September,
he
and
visited a couple times.
so now that's 5 months later, and things change. So, but I do think it's telling how they have so many tight end visits lined up.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I think they've got Isaac Jensen, who obviously is an in-state guy who's going to be, I think, they've already got the crystal ball for him. So, I think they'll probably get his commitment, and then one of those other 3 guys is probably how it's going to go. The rankings did get shuffled a little bit, I should say. So Darian Jones, the cornerback from Omaha North, is up to the number 2 spot in the state. The guy I was talking about, the offensive lineman, Landon Von Segrin, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. He's number 4 now. He's committed to Illinois. And then Amarian Jackson, the wide receiver, is also up in the top 5. So, I mean, I think that there's still a couple of in-state guys that Nebraska's in the mix for. I'm not sure if they haven't offered Amarian Jackson, which is kind of interesting in the 2026 class, but they have some pretty lofty targets at wide receiver, so that could be a reason why. And I'm trying to see about Darian Jones. I don't know a ton about him. I don't think he's been offered by Nebraska either. So really, it's out of the top 6 in-state players, 2 of them are already committed, and Nebraska's only offered 2. So in terms of in-state recruiting, I think you can tell Nebraska just doesn't really like that much what they're seeing in this 2026 class. So while we've seen a ton of in-state recruits the past few years, I think maybe this year we might only see 2 or 3 in-state commitments, if that.
Well, when you have ties to Georgia and Florida, and I'll say it again, when you have ties to those 2 states and you're having a little bit of success in those states, I mean, you look at Ja'Cory Barney, Cortez Mills, Vincent Shavers, Willis McGahee. I mean, and you think you can do better down there, then maybe that's where you go. I do think, maybe they should focus a little bit more on in-state recruiting, but it's clear that they have an area where they feel like they can find success.
All right, let's shift to some basketball talk. We'll have the bracketology update. And
We have
Michigan.
to.
Of course, Nebraska missed a big opportunity against Michigan in maybe what was the ugliest college basketball game I've ever watched. But 49-45 was the final, or 49-46, excuse me. Nebraska had a bunch of chances late. Bryce Williams missed 2 shots to take the lead. Connor Essegian missed one with about 7-8 seconds left. And then Berkey actually, Buchtenschel, however they say his name. I'm saying it wrong. No, I think that's it, because on the it's like Berkey Buchtenschel, I think is how you say it. Yeah. Anyways, that's how they've been saying on the TV. But he had a decent look. They shot. I think I calculated that outside of Bryce Williams and Sam Hoiberg, who was 2 for 2, the rest of the team shot like 12% from the field. Bryce Williams made more field goals than every other player on the roster combined, and I mean, it's disappointing because he was on fire, and Michigan literally just had to double team him, and that just thwarted the Nebraska offense. Connor Sejan played. Sorry, he played terrible. I mean, he just played terrible. He's on this team for one reason, to make shots, and he got a bunch of good looks, including a game-winning shot, and missed it. So it's like, I don't want to hate on the guy, but if you're here for if Connor Sejan can't make the 3-point shot, like, he can't be on the floor because he doesn't play defense. He doesn't do very much. So it's like, you have one job, man, and Bryce Williams got you a damn good look, and I said that was disappointing. I don't know why people were upset that Connor Sejan took. Bryce had no outside of like getting fouled by 4 guys. Like, he had to.
Yeah, he was getting mugged. Yeah.
So, it's tough, but at the same time, Nebraska, their bubble status didn't really change. They still are. One of the last 4 buys, according to ESPN, in the last update, they've been switching from one of the last 4 in to one of the last 4 buys. If you look at Bracket Matrix, which is tracking like 113 brackets, the last I checked, Nebraska was in on 110. So like they dropped slightly after the Michigan game. Their seed dropped a little bit, but not drastically. They're still, out of 115 brackets tracked by Bracket Matrix, Nebraska's in the field in 113. So as long as they beat Iowa at home and Minnesota at home and win a game in the Big Ten tournament, I think they're in. I think they still have to get to 20 wins, but they still control their own destiny. But they are waffling quite a bit on that bubble line.
Sounds good in theory, but I'm not too confident about Iowa. And honestly, Minnesota is a tough team too. I mean, it's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. I could see them beating Minnesota. I don't have confidence in Iowa, and quite honestly, if they wanted to beat Iowa, they should have taken care of business a month ago. That loss looms large, and I know you were talking about it off air, but that loss looms extremely large now, as well as a couple other games.
But yeah, that one really does, because probably would have been a quad 1 win.
Yeah.
I'm not sure now. I don't know what Iowa's ranked right now, but it would have been at that time. And so it'll be so this Saturday, home against Minnesota, must-win game. Minnesota's been playing a lot better. They really have been. They've pulled off some nice wins. So that's going to be a battle. Then at Ohio State on Tuesday, which should be another quad 1 opportunity.
They were tough last time we played them. Yeah.
And they're going to need a win too. And then home against Iowa, who's also trying to, they're trying to make sure they don't miss the Big Ten tournament. And frankly, Nebraska could still miss the Big Ten tournament. As much as we're talking about the NCAA tournament, if they lose all 3 of these games, they could miss the Big Ten tournament. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
Which could happen if they play like they did on Wednesday and this last game here.
And then you would be probably lucky to go to the NIT in that situation, because you're 17-11 right now. So they'll go to the NIT, worst case, but that would be pretty disappointing.
They should not be going to the NIT. I'm sorry.
I agree. So we'll see what happens with these next 2 games. They put themselves in a position where there's no margin for error. So, but they were there last year. They were kind of there 2 years ago, and they couldn't quite get to the NCAA tournament. So we'll see what happens. But it would be nice if they could win that game at Ohio State. That would help a lot. If they could win both of these home games, that would help too. But I'm not confident. Iowa's a scary team because they can shoot the hell out of the ball, and if they make 15 threes on you, then they just are a weird team, and anybody can lose to that team.
It sounds like that's been the story for the last 15 years, right? They can shoot the ball, and they really can. I don't know where they get shooters, but maybe we should recruit that area as well. And now this could be a very tough stretch for Nebraska basketball, or it could be a very good one. To be honest with you, I don't have confidence in a victory over Iowa. Ohio State is not easy. I mean, they took us to the wire in Lincoln back on the 9th. And Minnesota, like you said, they've been playing better basketball. They just upset UCLA, a couple days ago. And, this could not be an easy stretch. And quite honestly, Nebraska shouldn't be in this position. They should have taken care of business in January, and I don't want to belabor the point still, but if they don't make the tournament this season, the NCAA tournament, a lot of it can go back to the missed opportunities at the beginning of the calendar year.
Yeah, and then this Michigan game too, I feel like is one that they'll him and haw about a lot because they should have won that game. Like they really should have won that game. Defensively, like if you had told me that they were going to hold Michigan to 49 points, I would have thought that they won by 15. Like that's just that. Like there was never in my wildest imagination that they would be able to do that defensively, and
No, just bad basketball all around by everybody.
Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I don't understand it. But anyway, the women's team also is still kind of on the bubble. They're last 4 buys as well, according to ESPN. So they're playing Northwestern on Sunday. That would be a nice win to get. They just Washington's among the last 4 ends. So those Minnesota, so those Oregon. So there's a lot of Big Ten teams on the bubble. They've been dealing with some injuries as well. So hopefully they can get a win over Northwestern on Sunday, and that should hopefully solidify Amy Williams' team in the NCAA tournament.
Amy Williams, is a very consistent coach and a very good coach, and I know they've had some struggles this year, but I still felt confident in the women's team to be able to make the NCAA tournament.
So, all right, you guys. Well, that's the bracketology update. We covered the recruiting, Nebraska's new general manager hire. So we'll wrap it up there. We'll be back with another episode on Monday. We'll hopefully be covering a Nebraska basketball win, a couple of Nebraska basketball wins over the weekend. So check back. Please make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.